A dying man's final wish was simple. He wanted the daughter who never left his side to have everything. But by the time she found out what her brother had done, the papers were already signed, the lawyers were already paid, and her father was already in the ground. What she did not know was that a quiet woman who had sat in the corner of that bedroom for 6 months had heard every single word, and she had kept a recording. Howard Grant spent 40 years building something most people only dream about. He started with nothing, a single hardware store in rural Tennessee, a truck he could barely afford to keep running, and a work ethic that people in his town still talk about to this day. By the time he turned 65, Grant Supply Company had distribution contracts across 9 states and an annual revenue that placed him comfortably among the wealthiest men in his county. He was not flashy about it. He drove the same truck for 12 years. He ate lunch at the same diner every Friday. He shook every employee's hand by name. He had 2 children. Victor was the older one, smart, polished, and always aware of exactly how much everything was worth. Claire was younger by 6 years. She had her father's quietness and her mother's patience. She had moved back home at 34 to help when her mother got sick, and she had never quite left, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she chose to stay. When Howard was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2022, it was Claire who rearranged her entire life. She converted the downstairs study into a bedroom so her father would not have to manage the stairs. She coordinated with his medical team, managed his medications, drove him to every appointment, and sat beside him through every difficult night. She did not do it for the inheritance. People who knew the Grant family will tell you that without hesitation. Victor visited 4 times in 8 months. Each time he stayed for less than a week. Margaret Holloway had been a private nurse for 22 years when she was hired to assist with Howard's care. She worked 5 days a week, arriving early and leaving late. She was professional, precise, and almost invisible in the way that good caregivers sometimes are. Families forget she is in the room. They speak freely. They make phone calls. They have conversations they would never have in front of a stranger. Margaret noticed things. She always had. In October of 2022, Victor arrived for what would be his 3rd visit of the year. He stayed longer than usual. He was attentive to his father in a way that felt different from before. He brought documents. He spoke to Howard privately for long stretches of time. Margaret was not present for those conversations, but she was present for the aftermath. She saw Howard's expression when Victor left the room. She heard Howard call for Claire in a voice that sounded uncertain in a way it had not been before. One evening, when Victor had stepped out to take a phone call, Howard asked Margaret to come close. He told her he was confused. He told her Victor had been asking him to sign things and that the pain medication made it difficult to think clearly. He told her he was not sure what he had agreed to. He asked her if she thought he should call his attorney. Margaret told him yes. She told him to call Gerald first thing in the morning. Howard Grant died 4 days later. He never made that call. 3 weeks after the funeral, Claire sat in the office of the family's estate attorney and learned that her father's will had been amended 6 weeks before his death. The original will, drafted in 2019, had divided the estate equally between both children, with a specific provision setting aside the family home for Claire, given her years of caregiving. The amended will left 80% of everything to Victor. The family home was to be sold. Claire would receive what remained after legal fees and the costs of liquidating the estate. Claire did not cry in that office. She asked one question. She asked who had witnessed the signing. The attorney told her Victor had arranged a mobile notary. The signing had taken place at the house, in Howard's bedroom, on a Wednesday afternoon in October. Clare remembered that Wednesday. She remembered it because it was the same afternoon Victor had been there with documents. The same afternoon her father had seemed confused and uncertain. The same afternoon the pain medication had been increased following a difficult night. She hired an attorney before she left the parking lot. Her attorney, a man named Stephen Adler, who specialized in contested estates, told her the case would come down to one thing: testamentary capacity. Could she prove that her father did not have the mental clarity to understand what he was signing on that Wednesday afternoon? It was not an easy argument to make. Courts set a high bar for overturning a signed and notarized document. Then Clare remembered Margaret.
She called her that evening. Margaret answered on the second ring. There was a pause after Clare explained why she was calling, and then Margaret said something that changed everything. She said she had a recording. She explained that after Howard had spoken to her that evening, after he had expressed confusion about what Victor was asking him to sign, she had been troubled. She had gone home that night and thought about it for a long time. The next morning, she had returned to work and placed her phone on a shelf in the bedroom, partially hidden behind a row of medication bottles, with the voice memo application running. She had done it because something felt wrong and she did not know what else to do. The recording was 47 minutes long. Stephen Adler listened to it twice before he said a word. Then he told Clare that what she had in her hands was extraordinary. The recording captured Victor's voice clearly, walking his father through the document point by point. It captured Howard asking questions that revealed fundamental confusion about what he was signing. At one point, Howard asked Victor if Clare knew about the changes. Victor told him Clare had already agreed to everything. That was not true. At another point, Howard said he wanted to wait until he was feeling better to make any decisions. Victor told him the attorney needed it done today. The recording also captured Howard's voice in a way that any listener could understand. He was not the man who had built a 9-state distribution company from a single hardware store. He was a man in pain, heavily medicated, trying to follow a conversation that was moving faster than he could track. The probate hearing began in February of 2023. Victor's legal team arrived prepared. They argued that Howard Grant had been mentally competent at the time of the signing. They produced the notary, who testified that Howard had appeared to understand the document. They submitted medical records selectively highlighting moments of clarity in his final weeks. Stephen Adler requested permission to play the recording in open court. Victor's attorneys objected immediately. They argued that the recording had been made without consent and should be inadmissible. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Webb, took the matter under careful consideration and ultimately ruled that given the circumstances and the nature of the proceedings, the recording was admissible as evidence relevant to the question of testamentary capacity. The courtroom was completely still as the recording played. Every person in that room heard Howard Grant's voice asking if Clare knew. Every person heard Victor say she had already agreed. Every person heard an old man say he wanted to wait until he felt better. And every person heard his son tell him it needed to be done today. When it finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Victor's attorney requested a recess. When proceedings resumed, the arguments from his side were noticeably quieter. Margaret Holloway took the stand and testified with the calm precision of a woman who had spent 22 years observing people in their most vulnerable moments. She described what she had seen over those 6 months. She described Howard's condition on the day of the signing. She described the conversation he had with her the evening before, his confusion, his uncertainty, his request for her opinion. She did not editorialize, she simply told the court what she had witnessed. The medical expert called by Stephen Adler testified that based on Howard's documented medication levels on the day of signing, his cognitive function would have been significantly impaired.
He testified that the ability to understand a complex legal document restructuring an estate worth over $4 million would have been beyond what Howard's condition could reasonably support on that particular afternoon. Judge Patricia Webb took 9 days to issue her ruling. She found that Howard Grant had lacked testamentary capacity at the time the amended will was executed. She found that the evidence, including the recording, the medical testimony, and the account provided by Margaret Holloway, painted a consistent and credible picture of a man who was not in a position to make informed legal decisions. She declared the amended will invalid and ordered the estate to be distributed according to the original 2019 document. She also noted in her written ruling that the conduct documented in the recording raised serious questions that she was referring to the appropriate authorities for further review. Victor Grant did not appeal. Clare Grant kept the family home. She still lives there. The garden her father planted along the back fence grows every spring without anyone tending it particularly carefully, the way things do when they were planted by someone who knew what they were doing. Margaret Holloway went back to work the week after the ruling. She still takes notes. She still notices things. And somewhere in rural Tennessee, a hardware store that became something extraordinary still has Howard Grant's name above the door. Because some things, in the end, go exactly where they were always meant to go.